Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Fundraising in Uncertain Economic and Social Times, presented by AFP Massachusetts and CCS Fundraising. My name is Katrina Panslow, Marketing and Digital Communications Manager here at CCS. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's session. We have taken a sample screenshot of the attendee view here. You should see a control panel that looks like this at the side of your computer screen. You may have joined the presentation using your computer speaker system by default. This means if you can hear music through your computer, you should be able to hear the presentation. If you prefer to join over the telephone, open the audio section in the control panel for your dial-in information. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing them into the question box in your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will attempt to address as many as possible during the Q&A portion at the end. If we are unable to get to your question, we will reach out via email to answer it in the coming days. Today's presentation will also feature a few poll questions. When they appear on the screen, simply click on your answer. You will also receive the recording and the slides from the session via email later this week. And with that, I am pleased to introduce today's presenters. Sarah Krasin, Corporate Vice President at CCS, and Kate Villa, Corporate Vice President here at CCS as well, and President-elect of the AFP Massachusetts chapter. Sarah and Kate, I'll now pass it over to you.
Thanks, Katrina. Good morning, everyone. This is Kate Villa. On behalf of AFP Massachusetts and CCS, welcome to today's webinar. As the President-elect of AFP Massachusetts and a Corporate Vice President with CCS's Boston office, I'm so proud that our two organizations joined forces to convene this critical conversation in a time of unprecedented change and uncertainty for all of us. One thing that has become very clear over the past week is just how much we all crave connection and resources. Today will be the first of a weekly webinar series going forward that AFP and CCS will host in partnership with Women in Development of Greater Boston during this unique time. Please also watch your inbox for other smaller, more interactive convenings, virtual roundtables, that we will be hosting by sector. I'd now like to introduce my colleague and co-presenter, Sarah Krasin.
Thank you, Kate, and good morning. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Over the past week, Kate and I, along with our colleagues around the world at CCS, and I know all of you on the call have been grappling with a critical question. And that question is, where do we go from here? CCS has a bit of a unique perspective on this question. As a firm, we've been around for over 70 years, and we've seen the nonprofit world weather all kinds of storms, from 9/11 to the dot-com crash to the Great Recession. We also work with clients all over the world, and from Australia to London to New York to San Francisco to Boston, this crisis does have a unique element. It's not just economic, but it is deeply social. Fundraising, as we all know, is a contact sport, and we have rapidly and suddenly lost the contact. We're going to touch on several topics this week and in future weeks that we hope will help you overcome that significant hurdle. But first, we'd like to offer a reframing of the current phrase that has so quickly entered our lexicon, and that is, of course, social distancing. As we continue the critical work of fundraising for our missions, CCS has started to ask our clients to reframe social distancing as physical distancing. I don't know about all of you, but I spent most of the past 2 weeks on video calls with boards, client staff, donors, volunteers, and my own colleagues, and they felt very social. One president of a nonprofit we're working with actually quipped on a meeting with her staff last week via Zoom that it was the first time she had seen her entire staff face to face at the same time in months. And that's really why we're so grateful to have you joining us today. I think we all recognize that the nonprofit sector has a critical role to play in this crisis, whether you're a hospital providing direct care, a social services agency navigating increased needs, or a cultural organization providing much needed virtual joy and respite at this time, we know we will be the ones on the front lines long after this crisis has faded from the headlines. At CCS, we've been particularly encouraged to see philanthropists and major foundations start to step up and recognize their responsibility in this crisis. As I'm sure many of you have been following the news, foundations are rapidly changing grant-making practices to encourage rapid response and unrestricted giving. At CCS, with a lot of our clients, and hopefully many of you have seen major donors, trustees, your closest supporters step up in significant ways to support emergency funds and ensure that the work of their beloved nonprofits survive and thrive well beyond this crisis. So that means that all of you, all of us, as fundraisers who always have this deep responsibility to maintain a connection with donors, have an even more critical responsibility today. So all of us know fundraising is challenging, even when times are good. And at CCS, we often counsel our clients to frame their work and their approach around what they know and what they can control, and recognize what they don't yet know and what they can't control. And what we know from previous crises is that philanthropy is resilient. And in times of challenge, donors will continue to step up. Again, I think we're already seeing that during this public health crisis. What we can't control are things like how long the uncertainty will last, how each person, including ourselves, is going to individually feel about it day by day, and the long-term impacts this could have on how we do our work. That's why we felt a weekly convening going forward could be important and meaningful, and we look forward to navigating some of these new and unique challenges ahead with you. So knowing what we can and can't control, we'd like to offer 3 immediate recommendations. And in the back half of this presentation, Kate is going to do a deeper dive to show how these play out tactically, including a few case studies of what we've seen at our clients. But 3 points to consider as we transition to that. First, although it is extraordinarily challenging, and these are serious times, we can't be paralyzed by panic. There's a lot to worry about at an organizational level. I think we're all feeling that at our nonprofits. And fundraisers really can be a steady and important voice in the storm. What data tells us, of course, is that giving is somewhat correlated with the markets, but we also know that change in giving does lag behind the swings in the S&P 500, and it's typically much less dramatic. We also know that other factors like policy changes, GDP, can mitigate some of those swings. And I'm sure most of you, like I did, woke up to the news. Yesterday the Dow posted a one-day record. The S&P rose almost 10%. That, of course, was on the news of the congressional stimulus. But hearkening back to the earlier slide, we just don't know what the impacts are going to be yet. So our focus with our clients and our best advice to all of you joining us on the phone has remained to remain focused on what we can do in the short term. So second, this is the moment to focus on donor retention. Long-term data tells us that retention rates across the board have been stuck at about 50% for more than 10 years. So put more simply, for almost every new donor that an organization acquires, it loses another through attrition. Keep your supporters close during this time. We know from past crises, financial and social crises, that newer donors will be tougher. So keep your supporters close. And finally, my third point, don't be shy about communication during this time. At CCS, we interview thousands of donors around the world each year, and the number one reason consistently that people say they give is to make an impact. We're seeing this over and over again. People who are in a position to do so want to help right now. Keep them connected, which in a time of physical distancing is going to require a bit more creativity, which is what Kate's going to talk about in just a moment. And before I turn it over to Kate, I just want to bring up this slide. We went back in the archives for a session that CCS did at the Boston Economic Forum in November 2008, which of course was another time of great uncertainty for us, for our nonprofit partners, for the sector, for the world. And it's interesting to reflect on what we were hearing then and use it to guide our work plan today. And we know unequivocally that nonprofits that focused on staying connected with their core supporters, specifically individuals, were rewarded, and those that hesitated or lost touch had a hard time recovering quickly. So again, I'm going to move it to Kate, who's going to walk us through a series of a bit more tactical and concrete recommendations for adjusting our fundraising strategy so we can do that work of staying connected and retaining our donors during this time. And to set the stage for this discussion, we wanted to take a quick poll. So that's going to come up on your screen in just a moment. And I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to take us through the rest of the deck while we all complete the poll together.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So if last week was about adjusting to the new world of remote work and connecting via technology and all the hiccups that may have come with that, this week has been about starting to pivot and execute new plans that feel relevant. David Brooks wrote a great article for the New York Times, and as usual, it feels really relevant to this conversation. He said, don't try to tame the situation with some feel-good lie or confident prediction. Embrace the uncertainty. As Sarah said earlier, right now the world needs us, the fundraisers. Whether it's homeless youth who have no home in which to quarantine, hospitals that are being stressed, fighting to keep people alive, schools that are adapting to the challenges of this new reality, or arts and culture organizations facing loss of earned revenue while closed. All of our organizations and missions require and are counting on us to lead. This is an unprecedented combination of factors, and we need to be comfortable that we don't have all of the answers. But we also need to get comfortable with our obligation to be nimble and committed to do what is required to move our organizations forward, because our jobs are even more essential than they were just 2 weeks ago.
So with that, Katrina, I'll ask you to close the poll and we'll see what results we have. Is it going to pop up on the screen? There we go, thank you. So it looks like, it's interesting to see. Certainly it's along the lines with what we're seeing at our clients, the personal calls to major donors and the special appeals. That's terrific, because Kate is definitely going to talk specifically about how to continue that type of activity. We're also going to perhaps talk in future weeks around things that we know our clients and all of you are thinking more and more about, which is now that we've done some of the rapid response, how do we keep people connected in a virtual forum? So this is nice and interesting and helpful to see. So Kate, I'll advance the slide and let you take us through to the end. Thanks everyone for completing the poll.
Thanks. So as we think about how to move forward, the slide sort of goes from the bottom to the top, right? We want to start and always leading with empathy, right? Empathy is just the word that needs to be our guiding principle. But using empathy, right, we need to increase communication, develop a plan, reaffirm our mission, and pivot our case for support if necessary. We're going to talk a little bit about some special briefings, the importance of engaging those closest to you, how special appeals or days of giving can be helpful, and hopefully prepare for better days ahead. So on the next slide, we consultants just love a good Gantt chart, right? But in any communications with stakeholders, we want to lead with human impact. If you're a school, how are your students and families coping? If you're a hospital, can you share frontline stories of the doctors and nurses who are ensuring that we survive this crisis, or the preparations that you're making to be sure that you're prepared? Social services or animal welfare orgs, can you profile and share the people who ensure the most vulnerable people and animals still have heroes coming to work every day? Are your staff safe? Are you taking care of your clients in new ways? Did your students all get home safely, or is it more complicated? Share those stories, share those profiles, and make human connections. In addition, almost every organization is suffering negative financial implications. Arts and cultural organizations will be forced to consider massive layoffs, and some are already doing that, due to lost earned revenue. Galas, that all of you were counting on to meet annual goals this fiscal year may be canceled or moved to the next fiscal year in every sector. International fundraising is down due to canceled travel, first in Asia and now around the world. There are tuition implications, and religious organizations have lost their in-person congregations and therefore their weekly collections. Donors care. They need to know that your people are the first focus, but they also want to know what the financial implications and the contingency plans are. Alarmism is never a good idea, but communicating that you recognize the financial implications and have a plan is critical to build trust and demonstrate transparency. We at CCS know that people give to plans. So while the plan may change, demonstrating a commitment to a nimble plan creates confidence. So this slide is that Gantt chart that I referred to, right? So if we want to think about our audience segments, our internal and our external audiences, and the timing for a short-term plan, a Gantt chart can be a great tool. This example was developed by Rachel on our team for our client, Boston Latin Academy. And they're in the design phase of their Ad Astra campaign, which was catalyzed by a $1 million challenge grant from their alum, Nathan Blajarsek, who's the founder of Airbnb. And they were just in the beginning processes of building a unified foundation to raise money for this public school in Boston. And so the school started with and is continuing regular family and student-focused communication. But they're now ready, sort of in the second week of being on online learning, to transition to some campaign communications. And so what we're doing is focusing on the things that we can control, right? What is the case for support? What are the policies that will guide the new foundation, the new executive director, and what's the communication that we can offer? We're holding on cultivation events virtually for a few weeks because this is a new organization. So engaging new supporters is something that we want to hold on a little bit for a few weeks and then add back in if world events allow it. And holding on solicitations right now from all but the closest few leaders. So this is a campaign at the very beginning, and your campaign may be different, or your annual fund or your organizational fundraising, but thinking about where you are and what you need to do is really important at this time. In addition, if you want to dive into how you can elaborate on those ideas, right? Providing updates on your general operations, sharing detailed information. Is your event canceled? Is it postponed? How can you communicate with people that you have a plan going forward? Provide insight on how your organization is accommodating its employees and you're making sure that your people are safe and that your donors are aware of giving opportunities, right? The outline of your short-term and long-term action plans may help to have people want to support you when you need them most. On the next slide, we talk about reaffirming your mission and impact, and potentially even pivoting your case for support. So at times like this, we always want to come back to our core values, our mission, and our long-term strategic vision. How do they apply to universal issues and today's needs? This is always important when asking for major gifts, but it's even more important during times of crisis. So I'm going to share an example from about September 14th, 2001. I was working at a school that was founded during the Civil Rights Movement. It's called Manhattan Country School and still is. And on 9/11, my boyfriend at the time had an office at the World Trade Center. The first few days after September 11th were really challenging. New York shut down. The threat of air pollution kept people indoors and isolated. And everyone was scared and knew someone who had been affected. But what we found as the crisis continued was that people craved community. And the more we could build our case around community and as an antidote to the hate that caused 9/11, the more people were inspired to give. We were in an endowment campaign which had started to plateau. And while there was a short dip, we used the crisis to re-energize our case, coalesce our volunteer leadership around the renewed case, and move forward stronger than before. And I think that's a great example for me to think about, right? So how do all of us think about what is our mission, what are our core values, what's our long-term strategic vision, how does it tap into what people are thinking about today, and how can we communicate that? And so in thinking about how to do that, the most important people may be willing to step forward with leadership and challenge gifts, right? So if you're in the early days of a campaign and you require a lead gift, or you're at a place where you need a challenge gift to keep things moving, either for your annual fund and you're worried about your June 30th goals, or you're worried about the campaign benchmark in the later phases of a campaign, is there a leader who's willing to step forward, assert the relevance of the vision to today's reality, and possibly even create a challenge? And so again, would love to share an example of a school we're working with. So we're working with the Cristo Rey Boston, and this is a group of very vulnerable kids. So closing school means food insecurity, housing issues, lack of safety, lack of access required to complete online learning. And this crisis hits those families who may be facing, loss of income really hard. In addition, like many other organizations, their gala was scheduled for April 29th, and it's responsible for 50% of their annual fund, which is 2 months before the end of the fiscal year. So gala leadership, which was really strong, came together and said, we're going to do two things. We're going to use the committee to continue soliciting sponsorship for a rescheduled event in October, with a focus on paying as though the event would be in April. And we're going to recognize that angel gifts will be required to meet FY20 needs and cash flow, and also provide critical confidence that their campaign, set to launch just about that same time, is possible. So the campaign committee chair, who's also the gala honoree, is frankly a hero. And he stepped forward and made a series of 3 phone calls to lay the groundwork for and solicit a gift from a board member. And we don't know yet the results of the solicitation, so it's pending, and keep your fingers crossed. But watching a group of leaders really come forward, talk to each other, and set the stage for really foundational support for an organization is inspiring. And each of you, hopefully, have the tools to engineer something similar.
Thanks, Kate. It's a really inspiring example. And I think if I had to underline the thesis of our dialogue today, it would be that people want to help. And I think particularly in this time where this crisis is impacting every single person uniquely but uniformly, people like to feel helpful. And I think about an example, one of our clients is the Episcopal Church of Connecticut, and we've had a terrific story come out of that a couple of days ago, which underscored for me, and I think others we're working with, the importance of really leaning on your closest supporters at this time. This was an interesting example because this was a request, a solicitation that had been planned before the public health crisis, and the priest ended up transitioning the meeting to a virtual meeting. They met over video chat, which presented its own unique challenges for a donor who was elderly, and this was one of the first times that he had done it. But it went off smoothly, and the donor, in agreeing to make, which was a very significant gift for the parish, said, the needs of the parish have been here as long as I've been here, and I know they're going to be here after this, but I have to do my part to make sure that we can advance the work that we've been doing at the parish and that we want to continue doing to the parish. And this is someone who's been involved in various leadership positions, enjoyed a close relationship with his faith community and with the priest. And again, I think it's a terrific example of leaning on those close supporters that Kate mentioned. On the next slide, we also want to offer another example from one of our clients, the University of Southern Maine. I think we have a few of those friends on the call today, so shout out to you, and thank you for allowing me to use this example, which I think is just terrific. In addition to individual asks, we've received a lot of questions about special appeals. We believe at CCS that special appeals at this time are appropriate if they are done with care. And we've developed some simple rules of thumb that we offer here. And I think the USM video that they've developed is just tremendous. And I hope, Katrina, we can send out the link to that afterwards so people can view it as a good example. But the rule of thumb, first, focus on core supporters. Going back to some of the recommendations we made in earlier slides, this is the time to keep those folks close. They want to help. They want to know what you're doing to address the challenges before us, and they want to be asked to make an impact in a meaningful way. So make sure you're staying connected with those folks. The thing I love about the USM video is they really took bullet point number 2 to heart. Put the person first. Again, this is impacting all of us personally. The first slide of their video is, hey, we hope you're okay. And it's just such a nice, refreshing way to start a donor message. I wanted to call it out here. Be direct about the crisis's impact on your organization. Kate talked about that a little earlier. Not only the impact on your organization, but also the people you serve. USM, like many campuses across the country, is trying to manage through the challenge of what do we do with students who may not have a safe home to shelter in, or may not, for any number of reasons, be able to go back. And so they've asked for a specific need to address that challenge during this time, an emergency response fund for those students. I think a lot of us have seen those. But we offer these rules of thumb in hope that they're helpful. I know the president of the foundation shared, she sent this video to the board first, and within about 4 or 5 hours, they had already raised more than $20,000 for this special fund, which was just, I think, a tremendous early show of leadership from the board, and they're thinking about how they launch this to a wider audience. So again, I think we'll share the link to this after the slide, but just a tremendous example of these rules of thumb. And Kate, I'll advance the slide and turn it back to you.
Great. So while we need to focus on the short term and sort of those principles that we talked about, we know that there will be better days ahead. We know that people want to imagine the world with arts and culture organizations, with schools, with all of our organizations, our hospitals, healthy. And so how do we prepare for those better days ahead, right? Giving is a two-way street. Donors want to know that you value them and are concerned about their welfare, as Sarah just said. Offer any resources that might be helpful to your stakeholders, and keep the channels open even if this isn't the right time for a solicitation. Empower your volunteer leaders. Give them real jobs during this time. Ask them to lead. They could make thank you calls, stewardship check-ins, keep them close and empower them to lead. Flexibility, empathy, innovation, and exploring the true meaning of philanthropy. These times require that we pivot quickly, maintain relationships, and ensure that when the skies are blue again, our donors felt needed, informed, and cherished. And focus on activity and celebrate wins. Here at CCS, we've moved to daily good news. And if you don't have a big team where you can share news of wins and successes with virtual technology, look to the Chronicle of Philanthropy or AFP or other sources to see that this crisis has brought out a lot of good.
Thanks, Kate. As we've alluded to, this is what we hope is the beginning of an ongoing conversation. I mentioned, I think we have a unique vantage point just because of the breadth and depth of the work and clients and geography that CCS has access to, but we certainly do not purport to have all the answers. And again, we look forward to exploring those with you and answering some questions that I know have come in through the chat box. We, as Kate mentioned at the beginning, are going to be hosting weekly convenings. We'll do them Mondays at lunchtime for as long as there is an interest to connect and also do some learning together. 2 ways you can help us. There's a poll question open. We'd love to know what topic is top of mind for you in terms of planning for our immediate next webinar, which will start next Monday, March 30th at noon. We are also going to send, in addition to the recording and the slides from this presentation, we would love if you would complete a very brief survey that we're also going to send, which will, again, help us generate the most useful content and discussion questions for future larger convenings like this, but also some of the sector-specific roundtables that we're going to convene that Kate mentioned. Again, I just want to say thank you to our partners at AFP. They've been tremendous through all of this, and they'll continue to be great resources. Our future webinars will also be co-hosted by Women in Development of Greater Boston. And if you have, of course, an interest in partnering with us, if you represent a regional organization that you think could benefit from just being part of this brainstorming, we would welcome an email or a contact from you to just dialogue about that a little further. So with that, I think the poll is going to stay open for another minute or two, but I'm going to turn it back to Katrina, who's going to moderate 20 minutes or so of Q&A.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Sarah. Really, really terrific insights in today's presentation. I am going to give this just a few more seconds for everybody to provide their input on what topics would be most helpful to you. And like I said, and like Sarah and Kate said, we will be sharing information about the upcoming webinar series shortly after this event. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and we'll go into our Q&A portion here. We've had quite a number of questions come in via the chat box. Thank you so much to everybody that submitted a question. And there are a few sort of trending themes here. So I'm going to start with this first question. And Sarah, I'm going to direct this one to you. Since we don't know and can't control how the markets will respond when this is behind us, should we pause larger asks for the time being?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly a theme. I know some of you have asked on this webinar. We've been hearing it a lot as well. So I would say two things. First, this is really donor dependent. In general, CCS we've been recommending a sequence of priority in terms of donor-facing activity during this time. And I imagine this will continue to evolve depending on how long this crisis really lasts. So the sequence of activities, we've been saying to our nonprofit partners, stewardship is the top priority. Make sure that you're connecting with donors. It's not about asking, it's about communication at this point. Check in, ask how they are. A lot of the points that Kate was making at the end there about treating people with empathy and care, I think goes a long way. I know all of us at CCS, we've been getting forwarded great examples from volunteers specifically of communications they've received from their gift officers and other organizations they support. And I can say uniformly, it's been appreciated. And the more personal, the more individualized, and of course, the better relationship that already existed beforehand, the better. So stewardship, we're recommending now, is the top priority. The second priority we're talking to folks about is focusing on asks that potentially were in progress or scheduled before the public health crisis really started in this country. And that, again, we're taking that case by donor. I think the example I shared from the Episcopal Church of Connecticut really has underscored to me the importance of not making decisions for donors. In that instance, the priest asked the donor if he'd like to continue with the conversation, and the donor, again, really believed strongly that the church would be there for him now as it had in the past and would continue to be in the future, and wanted to keep the conversation, even if it's in a virtual forum. So be sensitive, but don't make assumptions, has been our general advice there. And then finally, the last priority we've been talking to folks about is continued cultivation and discovery efforts. As Kate mentioned with the Boston Latin example, different organizations are approaching that differently. That's donor-based dependent often. At Boston Latin Academy, that's a newer donor base, so they decided to put some of that on hold. If you have a donor base or a group that's used to convening virtually, this may be an opportunity to continue activity. So that's the order of priority we're proposing to folks at this moment, 9:07 a.m. on Wednesday. stewardship, asks in progress, and then ongoing cultivation activities. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you. All right, so I have a few questions that have come in really around the topic of messaging. I see one from Roger F here, Alan B, Peggy G, and essentially what they're asking is, what do you recommend for messaging for nonprofits who might not be seen as addressing an urgent need in light of the public health crisis? There's a lot of worry around insensitivity. Kate, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I think that's a great question. So I think when I said earlier, what do we want the world to look like? I know in our household, my nieces and nephews who I'm with are watching Mo Willems every day and doing doodles. We're listening to free opera. There's a lot of arts and culture consumption going on. And so donors want to hear from the places they feel deeply connected to. They care about your mission. They care about your values. So we're suggesting that, seek counsel, gather your trusted volunteer leaders, and start talking. And if you can get past sort of those revenue pieces and the worry of how to move forward on an operational level, start thinking about the messaging, right? Now may not be the right time to solicit, or it may be, again, as Sarah said, with those who are the closest to you, now may be exactly the right time to solicit. It may be exactly the right time to remind people of why they care and why your organization is needed. But it can also be a really good time to talk about what you're doing to help people through this crisis, why your values are relevant, and it's something your core supporters will feel proud and want to know. So again, I think, as Sarah said, you need to think about where people are on the continuum of their giving and act appropriately. But all organizations are important, and as long as you're transparent and honest, we think that's a good thing.
Great. So I have a question from Ali C and a few others on the line here, and it's really about capital campaigns or other significant campaigns. For capital campaigns or other significant campaigns that are currently in progress, how should we modify our approach? Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Thanks, Katrina, and thanks for the question. CCS obviously feels this one deeply. We are at our core a campaign planning and management firm, so this is top of mind for a lot of folks that we're working with and are continuing to work with. So again, I would offer perhaps 3 different buckets to think about in this moment if you are in the midst of a campaign or wherever you are in your campaign timetable. We've had a lot of dialogue with clients recently about donors with active pledges. So do I send pledge reminders at this time? How do we approach them for another gift for a special appeal or an emergency fund when they've just made a significant gift to our capital campaign? And so going back to my answer to the first question, this really is donor dependent, which is a challenging answer, but the right answer. And what we're seeing organizations do is demonstrate the flexibility that Kate mentioned. That's really important right now. But again, not making decisions for folks. So open the conversation on if additional flexibility might be required. Use it as a reason to stay connected. If you're looking for more ways to stay connected, this is a good one to really demonstrate care and concern and offer that flexibility. Again, donor specific, we've even seen some organizations with their closest supporters open a dialogue about if you had a pledge payment dedicated to a capital need now, having a conversation about where it might be redirected in this moment of need. Again, I think that's sector specific and very donor specific, but we've certainly had some gift officers do that with success, where perhaps a payment this year is reallocated to emergency funding needs or specific needs during the crisis, and then their capital campaign pledge is perhaps extended another year or 2 to allow for full fulfillment of that. So I'll offer that as a few brainstorms and strategy. bigger picture beyond just donor communication, two topics we're dealing with a lot with clients right now. That's campaigns in quiet phase and campaigns who are about to enter a public phase. So I'll address the quiet phase one first. For quiet phase campaigns, or campaigns that were actively asking for major gifts, I'll reiterate something we said earlier in the presentation, that campaigns are about more than asking. This is a moment to communicate. This is a moment to communicate how your plans may be impacted by this momentary crisis, if at all. I know one of our clients, the National Coast Guard Museum Association, has had some communication with their donors, and it's been a nice way for them to stay connected, and it's been nice for those donors to hear that they keep making good progress with the project, the opening date is still on track, donors' investments are still secure, and going to that prioritization of stewardship, that has been really important and helpful. So over-communicate and perhaps reconsider asks that may have been slated for Q2 on a case-by-case basis. And then on the public phase, again, we're talking to a lot of folks about modifying timeline. Obviously now, the things that make public phases exciting are the launch of those, big convenings, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings. They're simply not going to be possible right now. The strategy a lot of our clients are using is just a brief extension of the public phase. I think most donors, particularly donors who are close enough to support a capital campaign, are typically being pretty understanding in why that might be the case right now. So again, this goes back, I think, to those timeless principles of over-communicate. People want to help. Just be sure you're being honest and direct about the impact this is having. Thanks, Katrina.
Thank you. So we also, sort of on that same note, have received a few questions just around fundraising events from Tess B and Michelle S, among others. So overall, the question is, what do I do about any fundraising events that I had planned for the next week or few weeks or months? Kate, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think this is where we find out just how nimble and flexible and able to pivot we are, right? So two of our clients, you know, I mentioned one, but several others, right? The gala is a really big piece of revenue needed right at the end of the fiscal year and counted on. So you're going to have a revenue replacement plan. Another really great possibility is thinking about how to convene people virtually. So having another conversation with a client yesterday about what to do with reunion. And people were talking about how to have sort of a virtual meeting with some branded cups and everyone toast each other at the time, and then think about how to reschedule them. So if you've canceled the event, you know, think about how you creatively move to a virtual space and keep your prospective attendees. If you've moved it forward, talk to folks about how important the revenue is and how urgent that is, and how you look forward to the, you know, gathering back when the physical distancing is over, but you're really counting on them. And then again, as we said, empower your volunteer leaders. Give them real jobs. You don't have to reach out to every donor. Have your board members start working your phone tree. Gather people online to talk to them and give them those special briefings. You know, share the spirit of that awesome decision-making matrix you created. And again, if you have those close to you who really understand and you're able to link your mission to a really important problem you're solving in this moment, bring some of those campaign gifts, pivot your mission, bring them forward, and make those asks because people really do want to help. So it's not really an easy answer, but I think creativity and thinking it through will be helpful.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, I have another question, and this, I'll just read it out loud here. So we need to pay the bills. Should we be transparent with donors that we need help just to keep the doors open? Is it important to position ourselves as having a plan? Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure, thanks, Katrina. And that's a very real thing right now. And you know, we said earlier, and it's easy to say, you know, don't panic, stay calm. This is a challenging time for everyone, but it is challenging. And so one thing that we've been talking to folks a lot about, and also just our CCS colleagues to each other, and why we wanted to do these weekly convenings, is take good care of yourself. This is a stressful time. I know, again, easier said than done, but I'm finding a lot of challenge in doing things that normally do help keep my stress down. Drinking enough water, getting exercise, getting sunlight. So, I think gift officers, or frontline fundraisers especially, anyone who's in the fundraising space, or anyone who's in the nonprofit world, there is, it's hard to put yourself first sometimes, but if I could encourage you to do that, I would, because this is a stressful moment. Tactically, and more specifically to the question about how to communicate with the donors, is it difficult or challenging, or not the right strategy to communicate that we might need help paying the bills? I think this, again, is a moment for not creating alarmism, but being straightforward and starting with your closest supporters and having that conversation. Kate mentioned giving your board members real jobs. Ask for their advice. We were on a call with the CEO of one of our clients and a few of our key gift officers and the board chair and the campaign chair. And the CEO posed a great question to the board chair and the campaign chair during that meeting. He said, I'm really stuck on this. How would the two of you like to hear from us if you weren't in this room right now? So this is a moment for you to ask your board chair, for you to ask your development chair, for you to ask your campaign chair, what would you like to be hearing from us? This is a moment for them to offer really tactical advice, and you may get some new ideas for things they might want to be hearing, or you might just be reassured that you're saying the right things and you're on the right track. So be creative, ask for advice. Again, use your volunteer leaders, your trusted folks at this time. They want to help.
Great, thank you. I do have a few questions that have come in around our annual funds. So Evan G wrote in here, what do you think is the best way to engage our annual fund donors? Major donors we can easily call on, but we have a lot of donors to our annual fund where it might not be possible to make that sort of direct outreach. Do you, Kate or Sarah, have any insight around just maybe how to tweak messaging and forms of messaging to annual donors as opposed to some of the major donors and board members that you have close to you?
Well, one of the good things about the time that many of us who are healthy have right now is that people are very responsive to messaging. And so if you have a way of getting your message across, especially electronically, I've seen a lot of people pivot their days of giving, right? They had their days of giving already planned, especially in the school sector. These are really popular, but getting your community together to share, to set challenges, to get everyone involved and feeling like they're part of a really important one-day goal. That can be a really effective tool to both create community and encourage, fundraising results. So I would urge people from other sectors who haven't thought about that before. How can you look at, those days of giving and adapt them for yourself? How can you make sure the messaging in your appeals is both, putting the donor first, making sure they're okay, and then you follow the USM is doing the perfect messaging, right? If you're okay, we could use your help. And so I think that those donors are very open, especially those, if you're looking at your annual fund, as Sarah said, now may not be the time for acquisition, but retaining your donors, communicating with them, letting them know what's going on and how much you need your help is a timeless principle.
Yeah, Kate, the only thing I would add two things. Your last point is, we could triple underline and highlight and bold that, I think. Donor retention, I think we all recognize, is a challenge in good times. During previous times of social and financial challenge, it's certainly been an enhanced challenge. And so thinking about ways to improve or at least maintain your retention during this time, that's usually again related to communication, that's going to serve you extremely well, because I think we all hope and know that this current world situation will not last forever. And back to Kate's slide, we need to be preparing for sunnier and better days ahead. So the retention piece is an area of great focus, and an area where a lot of nonprofits could, I think, make some strides during this time. The other thing I would say is in the survey we mentioned, we're actually asking some specific questions about annual fund adjustments that you may be making if you're not proceeding as planned. So please do answer that. That'll be helpful to us to see, it's not a perfect statistical sample, but just an interesting cross-section of folks on the call, what adjustments you're making, and that may be a topic for future discussion that we can dive into a little deeper. So thanks for the question.
Great. I think we have time for one or two more. Sophie W. writes in, any advice for an executive director or other development staff who are brand new to the organization at this time?
Welcome. What a time to be brand new. Yeah, it's a unique challenge. I think under blue sky times, of course, the classic fundraising advice is using your first 6 to 12 months to do really thoughtful, strategic introductions, coffees with your key supporters, etc. Obviously, that's going to become more of a challenge. But back to our topic of starting to convene some of those virtually, I think especially as we all start to adapt to the new reality we're in, I would explore sitting down with, if you're a new executive director, sitting down with or getting computer screen to computer screen with your development director and having that same type of conversation about how do you still do some of those introductory meetings, or back to giving your board members real jobs, how do you engage them in a really meaningful way right now where you really could use some advice from people who have been longtime and deep supporters. So I think there's still certainly room for that. I think too, the same rules apply. People are going to want to hear from you, possibly even more than organizations that have long-term established leadership, right? They're going to want to know that the organization that they love and care for is being directed well, is stable, is in the hands of a confident leader. So if you haven't done mass communication to stakeholders, donors, we'd certainly recommend that, again, coming directly from the executive director or CEO, regardless, but certainly if you're new. Kate, would you add anything?
No, I think that's great. And I think, we always talk about transferring relationships from those who are trusted to those who are new. So that's sort of a universal principle. But I think Sarah's point about people just want to see that an organization they care about is in the hands of a confident leader. So if you can get anyone to help you lean in and vouch for you, that can be really helpful. And I don't mean that in a way of that they need to vouch for you, as much as if someone can sort of co-author something for you and they've been there for a really long time and you're new, that could be really helpful.
Great, thank you. I think we might have time for just one last question. And this is really around a few questions that we've gotten today are around just internal infrastructure for your development team and your development staff. A few questions have asked basically, how do you recommend sort of answering the call of a development team having to maybe reevaluate the budget and implement new cost containment measures, development staff changes. As consultants, how would we sort of advise clients that are being asked to grapple with that question?
So Katrina, is the question about remote work or just shifting responsibilities? And we can certainly speak to, yeah.
Sure. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Kate, before joining CCS, was the director of development, particularly in smaller and mid-sized shops for many years, and I think would have some great perspective on this. So, Kate, I hate to put you on the spot, but I don't want to steal your thunder because I think you really could answer this question nicely.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two pieces. So giving Sarah a lot of credit on our team, figuring out how to get our team of 20 working remotely. We have almost daily team check-ins. There's been a lot of projects that people have been assigned to work together on and create small group with specific goals so that people aren't just sort of sitting in their houses thinking about what they thought they were supposed to be doing and feeling frustrated about that, but really led toward action on short-term projects with short-term deadlines. So I think in the terms of how to manage your team, refocusing, creating small group work, empowering people to do the things they can control, that's really important. And as much connection as you can create among your team, again, celebrating wins, gathering together can be really important. And then in terms of sort of budgetary pieces where, you know, if your organization is facing huge losses and is worried about, you know, cutting back on development staff. I mean, I think my initial advice would be right on the spot. I think it's too early to think about what's going to need to happen, and you're going to need your fundraisers more than ever. So my advice would be that if you can pivot quickly, create those small group projects, create the wins, create the communication plans, show the value, show how it's going to pay off, show how you're setting the stage for your major asks, show how you're invigorating your annual fund, show how you pivoted your events. There shouldn't be any need or any reason for an organization to think that laying off its fundraising staff is a good thing to do. And if I think back to the crises, right, 2001, 9/11, or the Great Recession, you know, those organizations that doubled down and moved forward and didn't cut fundraising are the ones that came out stronger on the other side. So while that feels scary in the short term, in our experience, that's been the good long-term play.
Thank you, Kate. Really, really great advice there. And with that, we are just about at 9:30. I would like to thank you, Sarah, Kate, AFP Massachusetts, and everyone on the line for your time and participation today. As mentioned, recordings of today's webinar, as well as the slides, will be shared with this group as soon as they are ready. And for any questions that we weren't able to get to during this portion, we will be reaching out in the days to come to address them. Thank you again to everybody for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.